I want to tell you something before the story starts. This is not a story about forgetting. I need you to know that before anything else, because the wrong kind of listener hears a story like this and decides it means something it doesn't. It does not mean forgetting. It does not mean replacing. It does not mean the grief was small or short or easily survived. Claire died 14 months before any of this. She was 33 years old, and she was funny and deliberate, and she loved bad puns and good coffee, and the particular quiet of early Sunday mornings when the neighborhood hadn't woken up yet. She was my wife for 6 years and my closest person for 8, and when she died, a significant portion of the world went with her. This is the story of what happened after. Not what happened while I was still underwater. I was underwater for a long time, and that part belongs only to me and the people who were in it. But the part that came after the underwater, the part where light started to come back in and someone was already there waiting in it. I didn't know at the funeral that she had been asked to be there. I mean, I knew she was there. Ranata, Claire's best friend of 11 years, standing near the back of the church with her hands folded and her face doing the work of grief with an honesty that I noticed even through my own. She hugged me at the reception. She said she was sorry. She said Claire had loved me without conditions, which was the truest thing anyone said to me that day. And then, before she stepped away, she leaned close. Her voice was very quiet. She made me promise to stay, Ranata said. I didn't understand what she meant yet. I did not understand what she meant for a long time. My name is Joel Marsh. I'm 36 years old, and I teach history at Farragut High School in Knoxville, Tennessee, which I have done for 9 years and which I find, most days, to be the most reliable part of my life. I teach juniors and seniors American history, AP U.S. history, one section of a 20th century elective that I designed myself, and that the department chair has been trying to fold into something else for 3 years. I've kept it alive through a combination of enrollment numbers and stubbornness. My students like the class because I don't pretend history is tidy. I tell them it was made by people trying to figure out what to do next, which is not so different from what we're all doing. I'm not a man who expresses things easily. I want to say that plainly because it matters to the story. Claire used to say that getting me to talk about my feelings was like trying to open a jar that had been vacuum sealed, not impossible, but requiring a specific technique and a certain amount of patience. She had both. She knew, after years of us, exactly when to wait and exactly when to push, and she was nearly always right about which one the moment called for. After she died, the jar got harder to open, not because I was more closed than before, because the person who knew the technique was gone. I went back to school 6 weeks after the funeral. It was a Tuesday in November, gray and cold, and I stood in my classroom before the students arrived and looked at the room I'd been in 1,000 times and thought, this is a place I know how to be. I held on to that. The first months were survival, not dramatic survival. Nothing broke, nothing collapsed. I kept the house. I paid the bills. I graded papers. On Sundays, I made the same grocery list Claire and I used to make together, and I went to the same store and I came back and cooked something from it. And the cooking helped in the small way that routine helps, which is not the same as healing but is not nothing either. Renata called 2 weeks after the funeral to ask if I needed anything. I said I was fine. She called again in December with the same question. I said the same thing. In January, she stopped calling and started showing up, a container of soup left on the front porch, a text saying it was there so I didn't have to interact if I wasn't up for it. I wasn't usually. I thanked her by text. She didn't make it a thing. She sent different soups, which I noticed. Not the same recipe rotating, different ones, as if she were trying things. One week was a lentil with some kind of smoky depth I couldn't identify. The next was a white bean with rosemary that Claire used to make, and I sat with that one at the table for a while before I ate it, and then I ate all of it. I don't know if she chose it on purpose. I never asked. Some questions are better left in the space between what people do and what they say. I thought then that she was doing what good people do after a loss, showing up for a while, then gradually letting the normal distances reassert themselves. I thought she would fade out the way everyone eventually does, not from cruelty but from life continuing to happen to them while yours has stalled. She didn't fade out. By March, the soup had become a semi-regular occurrence. By April, she had started staying for 30 minutes when she dropped it off. Not long, 30 minutes, 40 at most. She would sit at my kitchen table and ask about the students, the class I was protecting, what I'd been reading. She didn't ask how I was doing in the large sense. She seemed to understand that the large sense was off limits and the small sense was available, and she stayed in the small sense with an ease that I found, gradually, easier to be around than I'd expected. I didn't think anything of it those first months. She was Claire's best friend. Of course she was checking on me. Of course she had an interest in how I was doing. It was a form of keeping Claire present, probably, for both of us. That was all. That was what I told myself. The thing I remember most from the first spring is an afternoon in April when Ranata came by, and I was in the middle of developing photographs in the small darkroom I'd set up in the basement. I restore old photographs. It started as a hobby. Claire found a box of her grandmother's photos, water-damaged and faded, and I learned to restore them digitally and then became interested in the analog process. And now I have a small darkroom and a collection of chemicals, and a patience for it that I don't entirely have for other things. It is very slow work. You cannot rush it. The image appears when it's ready and not before, and learning to wait for it without trying to force it was one of the things the work taught me. Ranata had never been to my house when I was actually in the darkroom. She knocked at the basement door and I called out to wait, and when I came up 20 minutes later she was sitting on the kitchen counter eating an apple, looking at a print I'd left drying on the rack, a portrait of a young woman from what looked like the 1940s, sepia tones, her expression caught between gravity and a suppressed smile. "Who is she?" Ranata asked. "I don't know," I said. "I found her in a lot of anonymous photographs at an estate sale. She keeps appearing in different ones. I think she was important to whoever took them." Ranata looked at the print for a long time. "You saved her," she said. "I restored the image," I said. "She's been there the whole time." She turned to look at me. Something in her expression shifted slightly, not quite a smile, something quieter than a smile. Then she looked back at the photograph. "Claire used to say you saw things other people walked past," she said. I didn't answer. I got a glass of water and stood at the counter and looked at the drying print with her, and the kitchen was very quiet in the way it had become quiet since November, and somehow that particular quiet was less heavy than it had been the last few months. She stayed for an hour that day. We talked about the photographs. I showed her some of the others from the same lot, the same woman appearing in garden settings and doorways, and one blurry shot at what looked like a county fair. Ranata looked at each one with the concentrated attention of someone who spent her days teaching children to look at things carefully. "She's happy in this one," Ranata said, holding up the county fair image. "You can tell from her shoulders." "Most people look at the face," I said. "The face performs," she said. "The shoulders tell the truth." I thought about that for a long time after she left. We fell into a rhythm after that, not planned, not discussed, just accumulated. She came by on Saturday afternoons, usually when I was often in the darkroom. I'd come up and we'd have coffee and look at whatever I'd been working on, and she'd tell me about her students, the art projects they were making, the ones who surprised her. She taught third grade, which meant 8-year-olds, which meant a constant and involuntary education in wonder. "One of them made a painting yesterday," she said one Saturday, "that was supposed to be a dog but looked like a very confident cloud. When I asked what it was, she said, 'It's Chester, he knows what he looks like.'" She shook her head, still smiling at it. "I kept it." "Of course you did," I said. "I keep everything," she said. "That's my flaw." "It's not a flaw," I said. She looked at me. A small beat. "No," she agreed. "I suppose it isn't." One Saturday she came and I was in the garden rather than the darkroom, weeding the rose beds Claire had planted the spring before she got sick, the beds I had kept up for a year and a half with the focused stubbornness of someone trying to keep a promise they'd never spoken out loud. Ranata sat on the back steps and watched me work, not filling the silence, and I found I didn't mind being watched. It was a different kind of quiet than being alone. "She planted all of these?" Ranata asked after a while. "Most of them. I added the climber along the fence after. I thought she would have liked it there." Ranata looked at the fence where the climber was doing well, putting out new growth. "She would have," she said. She had a whole theory about vertical gardens. She used to lecture me about it. A pause. I never told her it was my favorite lecture. I looked up from the beds. Why not? Because she would have given it every time she could, Ranata said, and she smiled at the roses with an expression that was grief and love in equal parts, the way they are when someone has been gone long enough that the grief starts to feel less like damage and more like a room in the house where they still live. I understood that expression. I had been wearing it for months. After that Saturday, she started helping in the garden sometimes. Not always, sometimes she still just sat on the steps and kept me company, which was its own kind of help. But she had grown up in a house with a garden, she said, and her hands remembered what to do with soil even after years away from it. She had a way of working next to me without crowding the space, which is rarer than it sounds. Some people, when they are trying to help, need you to feel them helping. Renata just helped. I noticed somewhere in that spring that the kitchen felt different on Saturdays. Not restored, nothing about those months was restored, but less like a room I was only keeping functional, more like a room that had someone in it. I noticed and I filed it away. I did not look at it directly. The thing that shifted was a Saturday in May. I'd been developing a particular photograph all week, a portrait of a man and a woman, probably early 1950s, standing in front of a house. The image had been severely water damaged. The woman's face was almost entirely gone, the man's expression still legible but the context lost. I've been working to restore what I could, the way you work on any problem that requires patience more than skill, a little at a time, returning to it, not forcing. When Renata came that Saturday, I had the before and after laid out on the kitchen table. She sat down across from them and looked without speaking for a moment. "What did you find?" she asked. "They were standing in front of their own house," I said. "You can see it in the reflection in the window. It's their house, their car. They were having their photograph taken at home. Not a special occasion, just a Tuesday probably." She looked at the restored image. The woman's face had come back partially, one eye clear, the line of a cheekbone, the suggestion of a smile. "That's enough," Renata said softly. "To know she was there." I looked at the photograph. Then I looked at her. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the woman in the print with an expression I recognized because I had worn it myself, the particular look of someone thinking about a person who is gone. "Are you all right?" I asked. She looked up. "Yes," she said then. "I miss her. I think about her every day. I know I know it's different from what you carry, but I miss her." "It's not different in kind," I said, "just in shape." She looked at me for a moment. Then she said quietly, "I don't think I've let myself say that to you before because it felt like I didn't want it to be about me." "It's not about you," I said. "It's about her. We're both just carrying it." The table was between us. The photographs were between us. Outside, a late afternoon rain had started, the kind that comes in May in Tennessee and smells like something beginning. "Thank you," she said, "for letting me keep coming." I thought about the soup on the porch in January. The text that didn't require a response. The 30 minutes that became an hour, that became an afternoon. The different soups, each one chosen as if someone were paying careful attention to what might help. "Thank you for not stopping," I said. Neither of us said anything else for a moment. The rain came down. Something in the room had shifted, not dramatically, not with announcement. Just a door that had been partly open, opening a little further. I noticed it. I let it be. Donna arrived on a Friday evening in late June. Claire's mother, 71 years old, from Maryville, 2 hours from Knoxville. She came twice a year, once in the fall, once in the summer, and stayed for a long weekend. I was glad for those visits mostly. Donna had never made me feel like a caretaker of Claire's memory or a symbol of her loss. She treated me as a son-in-law still, which mattered more than I knew how to say. She had known Renata for years, of course. Renata had been at every birthday dinner, every holiday gathering that Donna attended, the person Claire called first for everything. But knowing someone through your daughter, and watching that person come through your son-in-law's kitchen door like she knows where the coffee lives, are different kinds of knowing. Renata came by on Saturday afternoon, as she often did. I had forgotten to mention to Donna that this was a regular thing now. Donna was in the kitchen when Renata came in. The greeting was warm, they embraced, they asked about each other's summers, but I watched Donna's eyes track the ease of it behind the warmth. The way Renata came in without knocking, the way she knew where the coffee was, the way I made room for her at the table without thinking about it, the particular quality of the silence between us that is different from the silence between people who see each other occasionally. After Renata left that afternoon, Donna sat across from me with her hands around her cup and didn't say anything for a moment. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the summer light was doing the long gold thing it does in Tennessee in June, the garden full and green. Then, she comes every week. Most weeks, I said. Joel, her voice was careful, measured. She was Claire's closest friend. I know. I just wonder if she started again. I don't want to say the wrong thing. I know you're not, I know there's nothing, I just want to make sure you're being careful. I looked at my cup. Donna. She was Claire's, she said, and the word came out small and ragged at the edges. She was Claire's person, and I keep coming here and there's a little more of her here every time and a little less of. She stopped. Her jaw worked. I'm not trying to be cruel, I don't know where my daughter is in this house anymore. The sentence landed softly and destroyed something. I set my cup down. She's here, I said. She's everywhere here. She's in the books on that shelf that I haven't moved, and the coffee she chose, and the photographs on the wall, and the garden she planted that I keep alive because I don't know how not to. She's not going anywhere. Donna looked at me. Her eyes were bright. I know Renata was hers, I said. I know what it might look like. I don't know yet what it is. But I know Claire loved Renata and trusted her, and I think Claire would not call this a betrayal. Donna was quiet for a long time. I waited. There are moments in conversations where you cannot push, where the other person needs to find the thing they are trying to say without your help. I had been teaching history long enough to know that people arrive at the truth in their own time and only in their own time. Then she said, "She talked about you both, together. She used to say, she'd say, Joel and Renata are the two best people I know and they barely know each other, which is a waste." I hadn't known that. She said that, I asked. More than once, Donna said. Her voice had gone quieter. I'd forgotten until just now. She looked at her cup. Then out the window at the garden Claire had planted, still growing, still tended. The climber on the fence, the roses along the bed. The space that had been cared for by someone else's hands for the last year and a half and somehow still looked like hers. "I'm afraid," she said simply. "That's all it is. I'm afraid of losing one more thing that was hers." "You won't," I said. "I promise." She didn't say anything else about it, but before she went to sleep that night she paused in the hallway and said, "She does seem kind, Renata." "She is," I said. Donna nodded once and went to bed. I sat in the kitchen for a while after. The house was quiet in the way it was always quiet at night now, but it was a different quiet than it had been 6 months ago. Less like absence and more like something waiting. I thought about what Donna had said. Joel and Renata are the two best people I know, and they barely know each other, which is a waste. I thought about the soup on the porch in January, the texts that didn't require a response, the darkroom afternoons, the roses. I thought about a promise Claire had asked someone to keep. I picked up my phone and looked at it for a long time before I put it back down. Not yet, but soon. I called Renata the Sunday morning after Donna left. She answered on the second ring. I could hear her moving around her apartment, a Sunday morning sound, coffee and unhurried light. I said, "I need to ask you something and I need you to tell me the truth." A pause. "Okay. At the funeral, you said Claire made you promise to stay. What did she mean?" The pause that followed was long. Not evasive, thoughtful. The kind of pause that means someone is deciding how to say something true. "In her last few weeks," Renata said, "she asked me to stay close to you after. She said you try to go quiet. She said you knew how to survive things alone, but that surviving alone wasn't the same as living, and she didn't want you to just survive." I sat down. I was in the kitchen. The morning was coming through the window over the sink. "She asked me to check on you," Renata said. "To bring food, to show up, to not let you disappear. She made me promise." "And you kept it," I said. "Yes, for 14 months. Yes." I looked at the garden through the window. The roses were doing well this year. I had kept them watered, kept them deadheaded, the same as Claire had showed me. "Why didn't you tell me?" I said. A breath. "Because I was afraid you'd take it wrong, that you'd think I was only there because of the obligation and not because I wanted to be. And I wasn't sure at first that you'd be wrong." A pause. I also thought if you knew about the promise you might feel managed, like she'd arranged things, and you'd already had your whole life rearranged by losing her. I didn't want to add to that. I don't feel managed, I said. I know, she said. That's why I can tell you now. I sat with it for a moment. The morning light, the garden. Particular weight and warmth of what she'd just given me, not only the truth about the promise, but the truth about why she'd kept it quiet. Renata, I said. I know what you're going to ask, she said quietly. Is it still the promise, I said. When you come, is it still because she asked you? The pause was the longest one yet. It was, she said. For the first few months, I won't lie to you. I came because I'd promised and because it felt like the right way to keep her close. Both things. A breath. And then somewhere I stopped counting the months and started just wanting to come. Because you show me photographs of people nobody else remembers. Because you look at things the way she said you did. Because you made room at your table without making it feel like charity. Another pause, quieter. It stopped being the promise a long time ago, Joel. It became something I chose. I sat in my kitchen for a moment with that. Outside, a car passed on the street. A bird started somewhere in the garden. The same kitchen, the same morning sounds, and something entirely different present in all of it. Then I said, "Can you come today?" she said. "I'm already getting my keys." She came within the hour. I was in the darkroom when she knocked, and I came up with developer still on my hands, and she was standing at the kitchen door with her coat on and her expression open in the way it went when she'd stopped managing herself and was just present. I said her name. She said mine. That was the beginning of it, not a dramatic beginning, not a sweep-off-the-feet moment, just two people who had been careful for a long time deciding in the same breath to stop being careful. I took her hands, developer and all, and she didn't pull away. "I don't know how to do this," I said. "I want to be honest about that." "I know," she said. "I don't either, but I think we do it the same way you develop a photograph. Slowly," I said, "and you wait for it. And you don't force it," she said. "And when it comes, it's already been there the whole time." I looked at her. She looked at me. She had been coming to this house for 14 months. She knew which drawer the dish towels were in and which burner on the stove ran hot, and that the back door stuck in humid weather and needed a lift when you opened it. She knew the photographs and their histories and which ones were mine, and which ones I was restoring for strangers. She had sat in this kitchen in the long quiet of winter and the early warmth of spring and the full green weight of summer. And she had been, without either of us naming it, the most consistent presence in my life. Claire had asked her to stay, but Claire had not asked her to sit on the back steps in the May rain and tell me that the woman in the county fair photograph was happy from her shoulders. Claire had not asked her to help in the garden or to annotate the margins of her grocery lists or to say that keeping everything wasn't a flaw. Those things were Renata, those things she had brought herself. I kissed her in the kitchen on a Sunday morning in July carefully, the way you do something you mean. When I pulled back, she was very still. "She knew," Renata said softly. "That first, I think she knew what she was asking." "Yes," I said. "I think she did too." We stood there for a moment, the three of us, in the way that people who love the same person are always a little three, and the morning came through the window, and the roses were growing outside, and the photograph on the darkroom rack was still waiting to be fully seen. What happened after happened slowly, the way things that are built to last are built. Renata didn't move in for another year. We didn't rush. We had coffee on Saturdays that became dinners on Saturdays that became Sunday mornings at my table, with the newspaper she liked to read in sections, and the particular way she annotated things in the margins of whatever she was reading, which I discovered she did to everything including grocery lists. I showed her how to develop a photograph, the whole process, from loading the film to the moment the image begins to appear in the developer bath, that slow arrival out of blankness. She stood at the darkroom counter and watched it happen with the expression her third graders probably wore when they discovered that the confident cloud was also a dog, or that the paint you thought was one color turned into another when the light changed. "There she is," Renata said, the first time she watched an image come up. "There she is," I said. She showed me what her students were making, the confident clouds and the paintings that looked like something else entirely and were exactly right. She brought things into the house the way she'd always brought things, without fanfare, without asking if it was okay, just setting a houseplant on the kitchen windowsill one day because she said the windowsill looked like it was waiting for something. I didn't move it. It grew. She cried in the garden once in September, kneeling beside the roses while I was inside. I came out and found her there with her hands in the dirt and her shoulders shaking, and I sat down beside her in the soil without asking and stayed until she was ready to stand. I keep thinking she should be here, Ranata said, to see this. She is here, I said. She planted this. Ranata looked at the roses for a moment. Then she leaned against my shoulder. We stayed in the garden until the light went. Donna came in the fall as she always did. I made the same dinner Claire used to request when her mother visited. We ate at the table and talked about Claire, the way we always had, and it wasn't strange. It was the truest kind of remembering, the kind that doesn't require the person to be gone in order to speak of them. Donna told a story about Claire at 14, furious about something she'd been told she couldn't do and proceeding to do it anyway with great precision and zero apology. Ranata laughed so hard she had to set down her fork. She told me that story, Ranata said, but she left out the part about the bicycle. Donna looked at her. She told you about the bicycle. She told me about the bicycle. They both laughed, the kind of laugh that has grief and joy braided through it in equal measure, and the table felt full in a way tables are supposed to feel and don't always manage. Before Donna left, she found Ranata in the kitchen and stood beside her for a moment. I heard Donna say, quietly, she would be glad. I didn't hear what Ranata answered. I didn't need to. On the first anniversary of the day I asked Ranata to come over, I gave her a photograph. One I'd restored from the estate sale lot, the woman from the 1940s, the one Ranata had been the first to ask about. She'd appeared in 17 photographs in that lot, always alongside the same man, always with that quality in her expression that was gravity and suppressed joy at the same time. I had printed the clearest one, the one where you could see both of them together, the man slightly behind her with his hand at her shoulder, both of them looking at something outside the frame. I framed it in plain wood and left it on her kitchen counter with a note that said only, she was there the whole time. She just needed someone to look. Ranata called me when she found it. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, I love you. First time she'd said it. I'd known it for months. The way you know a photograph is developing before it's fully visible, the image present in the chemistry, patient, arriving in its own time. I love you too, I said. I have said it every day since. Claire made Ranata promise to stay. She kept that promise for 14 months with soup on the porch and texts that didn't require a response and Saturday afternoons in a kitchen learning to be present without being asked. Then the promise was kept, and she stayed anyway. Not because she'd been asked to. Not because of obligation or guilt or the weight of a dead woman's love for both of them, because she was Ranata, because she kept everything. Because she looked at a photograph of a woman no one remembered and asked who she was and then said, you saved her. I didn't save her. I restored the image. She had been there all along. There are things that are true about love and grief that I couldn't have told you 2 years ago. One of them is this: grief does not end. It changes shape. It becomes a room in the house rather than the whole house, and you furnish it carefully and you leave the door open, and sometimes you sit in it a while and then you come back out. The other is, love, real love, does not require you to forget. It requires only that you stay. She made me promise to stay. She kept it. And when the promise was done, she stayed anyway. That is the whole of it. That is everything.